He'd want to bring down the whole universe with him. The ultimate revenge. Thousands dying of the plague. Like the shadow of death itself, one figure scything its way through the terror and anguish. Count Dracula.
Mike Price here, the author of the Forgotten Horrors series of movie history books. We are continuing here with our survey of the Dracula series from Hammer Films. The famous cycle was spiraling toward a collapse in 1973 when Hammer allowed director Alan Gibson and screenwriter Don Houghton a second shot at failure with the Satanic Rites of Dracula, an inglorious end to Christopher Lee's long involvement with the series, but a harbinger of indignities to come for the heroic protagonist played by Peter Cushing. Christopher Lee explained in 1999, "Our script this time around was too busy congratulating itself on its theory of vampirism as a form of capitalism. And so what else is new?"
You mean us?
You said we would use the plague only as a deterrent.
To hold governments to ransom.
You promised us
We've
power.
served you faithfully.
Silence!
To bother with Count Dracula's meat and potatoes fare of visceral horror and erotic tensions. Alan Gibson's unsubtle direction emphasized this point to almost the exclusion of suspense, Lee continued, although it was always a pleasure to work with my dear friend Peter Cushing, and we put up with a great deal of nonsense as a result. The overriding conceit is a 1974 period setting in which Count Dracula, Lee of course, has resurrected himself to become a reclusive captain of industry, modeled after Howard Hughes, who plans to infect the planet with a molecular vampire virus.
Foolish man. A bullet cannot harm me.
A silver bullet, Dracula.
Dracula's new generation nemesis, Van Helsing, Peter Cushing, tracks the boss vampire to his high-tech countryside estate, which will wind up ablaze while Dracula's epidemic proves not transformative, but rather fatal. "I don't see the point in the film," Lee told the trade press in 1973, "other than an opportunistic ride on the same old bandwagon."
Count Dracula!
Lee would drop out after this installment. Cushing would remain on board for the next year's The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, a weird departure from the Hammer style in collaboration with the Shaw Brothers Asian martial arts filmmaking factory.
Filmed entirely on location in Hong Kong.
But we were talking about the Satanic Rites of Dracula. Gibson's pacing here is more precipitous than the style he had applied to the prior year's Dracula AD 1972, though tending to bog down in Houghton's anti-capitalist arguments. As the historian Phil Hardy has written, the notion that property developers or business moguls are bloodsuckers is too shallow a metaphor to sustain the complexity of the phenomenon condensed in the vampire myth.
Do not meddle, or you will have to deal with me.
You are Count Dracula. Of course.
Mr. Denham, the powerful recluse.
Or, as Christopher Lee expressed it, our audiences, loyal though they had been, didn't want to come to a Dracula movie to be lectured with some socialist economic rant. Or, as I said at the time we wrapped the picture, I've enjoyed as much of this as I can stand. The image of Dracula as a modern-day robber baron proved influential nonetheless. Many years later, when the filmmaker George A. Romero would cast Dennis Hopper in an aloof and predatory feudal lord role, though hardly a literal vampire, for 2004 Land of the Dead.
Zombies, man. They creep me out.
Though modernized, the film nonetheless has an old-world 19th century period feel in Brian Probin's camera work, an awkward reminder of what Hammer had done best back when the studio was still capable of doing its best. I had mentioned 1974's The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. This adventurous title will represent our closing chapter in our survey of Hammer's imperishable, well, mostly imperishable, Dracula series, coming right up. Until then, this is Mike Price, signing off for the meantime.
Evil rules, you know. It really does.